at Otaniemi and those of us listening and following us online. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this month's edition of Better Business, Better Society seminar. And we're talking today about a very interesting topic, which is geopolitics and business. Before we go to our evening topic, I'll give you, as customary is, a brief update of what's going on at School of Business. I wanted to lift up something that we do pretty much as part of our normal operation is we involve our students in a lot of learning that is based on practical experiences, and part of that we use student projects in our courses and in our programs. And these have been part of our school's activity for a long time, and we are exploring some new ways of doing that. It's actually there towards the bottom of my slide. So the new components that we are kind of trying out in a pioneering spirit this fall is we have opened our customary business projects to NGO field. We have a few potential projects where we are right now recruiting students in order to get into those. And in all of these projects, we always have a faculty supervisor. Students actually get paid for the work that they do on these projects, and they're usually on a very high level. We are quite proud of the work that our students do for these companies, and now hopefully also for NGOs. Another pioneering projects that we have there, we're actually doing our first ever international business project as well. And that is done between aalto students and students from our partner school in Portugal, Nova, and there are actually members from both schools in that group, and they're completing a project on energy solutions that have Finnish and Portuguese flavor. So we look forward to how that project goes as well. I thought I would mention also there on top of my slide about what has been going on in general this fall. Many of you have certainly noticed that our faculty is highly visible, and while our faculty is known for their top research, academic research that goes towards the best journals in the world, they're also very practically oriented in terms of participating in day-to-day debates. And the list that I have there on topics where you have seen our faculty visible in the media is just a snippet of what all we do. So we obviously see societal impact and affecting these political or practical debates, and given the science background on those arguments as a very important part of what we do. Lastly, I was going to mention, we have now November Better Business, Better Society seminar just starting, and this will actually be the last one for this year. Our seminar series goes on a little Christmas break here. A bit early sounds like, right? The Christmas break will actually be a little bit longer than usual this time too, because in January we have our homecoming day coming. It's on January 27th, and our event team and needs to focus on that event. The messages on homecoming day or invitations go actually out tomorrow, and so that's the start of the ticket sales for the event. It'll be an all-day event here in Otaniemi. Pekka Lundmark will be the keynote speaker, and on top of that we have a very interesting program for the afternoon with all our academic departments bringing exciting topics there for discussion. So that's something for you to look forward to. The next BBBS seminar will probably be in March 2023, but luckily you have some interesting program between now and then. Now we go to tonight's interesting program, so I'm going to invite our professor Tiina Ritvala here on stage. She will be guiding the discussion that we all look forward to. So again, welcome to you all, and welcome Tiina.
A very good evening on my behalf as well. A convergence of crises and disruptions has darkened the European skies, as expressed in a recently released report by McKinsey. The war at the heart of Europe has resulted into a humanitarian emergency and Europe's fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War II. The cost of life's essentials has gone through the roof with high inflation rates, and regional food crises are expected. Business signs are weakening, country risks are being reassessed, and government debt is skyrocketing, as discussed in the previous session of this seminar series. In the short run, the energy crisis threatens to ruin the net zero transition to decarbonize the world. At the same time, the global economy still suffers from the pandemic and supply shortages, for instance in semiconductors. Polarization and rising populist sentiments cause political turbulence and surprises as reflected in the Brexit vote. Overall, the confrontation between liberal and authoritarian regimes is strengthening. This is a defining moment in history where the playbooks of the past political and economic crises might be only moderately helpful. While uncertain times do not favor structural changes needed to strengthen our economies and sustainable development, it is important to envision forward-looking solutions. As Winston Churchill has famously said after the Second World War, he said that never let good crises go to waste. Today, we have invited three guests from different countries and sectors of society to reflect on how to navigate this turbulent nexus between business and politics. The first speaker is Executive in Residence of Aalto University School of Business, Mr. Esko Aho, who will give a keynote on business and geopolitics. After this, we will hear the introductory speeches by our two honored guests here, Her Excellencies Olga Dibrova, Ambassador of Ukraine in Finland. She will discuss how the business community and government can contribute to the reconstruction and transformation of Ukraine. Thereafter, we will hear our visiting professor, Maria de Villa, Professor of Strategy at IAFIT University of Colombia, who will discuss how managers can assess their exposure to geopolitical risk. After these three presentations, the audience here has the possibility to ask questions. And those of you who are following this event online, you can please use the Pressumer for questions. We will then continue with the panel discussion here with our guests. But I would now like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Esko Aho, to the stage. Esko Aho, as you probably know, has acted as Prime Minister of Finland during the economic crisis-ridden years from 1991 to 1995, when Finland also joined the European Union. Esko Aho has served as the President of the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, and Executive Vice President of Corporate Relations and Responsibility at Nokia Corporation, and also the Board of Directors of the largest bank in Russia. Esko Aho, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak about business and society, topic that is rather familiar because I'm one of those few Finns, and even globally quite few, who have been in an role both in business and politics. And quite often I have been asked, what is the major difference? Now it works. Sorry. All right, I will start again. So to repeat that I'm one of those few who has been in an executive role both in business and politics. And quite often I have been asked, what is the difference between these two? And I think there are not that much differences. Maybe the most important thing is separating political decision making and governmental decision making from business decision making is the fact that when you are in government, you have a universal responsibility. But in business, you have a limited agenda. For example, if you have to fire employees, you can do that in business, in a company, and within a short period of time, costs will disappear. But in a government, especially if you're operating in a crisis period, you can fire people, but those costs are coming from other ways. Social security costs will be increased, compensations for unemployment, and so on. So this universal responsibility is something which is different. I'd like to ask you to read, if you have time. You can spend time in a very profitable way when reading an article about what makes a power great. That is from Foreign Affairs. It's based on the Rand Corporation large report analyzing how to create a successful nation or company. And actually, if you compare these rules, they are roughly the same. And I think one of the reasons why we are looking at different kind of nationalistic political crises now in different parts of the world, the fact is that the global system, economic system recently, has not put enough emphasis on anything else except efficiency. Efficiency has been the leading criteria. But as you can see, efficiency is important, but it's not everything. If you don't do your role or operate in a society in a positive way, the fact is that business environment is not sustainable, and your companies will suffer from that. So there is an interdependence between business and government in a way which we have to understand better if we want to solve these existing problems. And then the world has changed. You remember what happened in Suez Canal in April last year. One ship was blocking the whole canal for 6 days. And it was a huge crisis. We were worried about our Christmas, is it coming? Because the risk that Christmas presents will not arrive in Finland on time. But otherwise, we were worried about global economy and impact in global economy. Roughly 12%, 13% of the global trade goes through the Suez Canal. Do you remember when it was, before this, when it was blocked last time for a bit longer period, not only for 1 day or two, but a longer period? It was 1967. There was a so-called 6 days war, 1967, and the canal was blocked. When it was reopened? 8 years later, 1975. And if you read history books, you will not recognize that it was creating any major problems. Because the world was different. The world was totally different. Interdependency has increased in a massive way since 1967 or 75. It was exactly 8 years blocked, the Suez Canal. So this is an example about one aspect of interdependency. Another aspect is relevant as well. Quite often we are looking at risks between earlier risk between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War period was was challenging for each of us. We are worried about consequences of the Cold War. But now we are worried about the US and China, and good reasons for that. We are speaking about decoupling, we are speaking about risks of conflict between these two countries. But on the opposite side, never in the human history, two biggest economies in the world and most powerful countries in the world have been so much interlinked or so much interdependent than they are today. So that is also one factor which we have to keep in our mind. And then the third comment, it comes from the Club of Madrid. I'm a member of Club de Madrid. That is an institution created early 1980s. It's consisting of former presidents and prime ministers. We are roughly 50, 60 former heads of state or governments. And we have regular meetings. Now we had a meeting in Berlin. And then we were heavily criticized, and governmental institutions, especially global governmental institutions, were heavily criticized by emerging market countries and representatives of those countries. They said that these institutions are not solving our problems. Why the World Bank, IMF, the United Nations are not going to make any major efforts because they can solve all the problems we are facing today. And national governments as well, those rich governments, they can do that. I couldn't stay silent. I said that, please, that was Indian who was criticizing the global system and expecting that if institutions will work well, everything will be fine. I said, how many fixed line connections, telecom connections you had in India 1990? He understood immediately what I'm going to say. And he said close to zero. The fact is that the number was roughly 30 million. And I don't know how many of them were operational, not all. And it took 7 years. If you ordered a new connection, you had to wait 7 years to get that. And I asked him, how many connections do you have now, telecom connections you have now? He estimated 1.5 billion. My next question was, how much money World Bank, global institutions, or the government of India has spent for that? The answer is zero. Zero. And that is most remarkable change that has happened in India since the beginning of 1990s. So if you don't understand the role of business and the capacity of business to assist to create good societies, well-functioning economies, and even equality in societies, you cannot find solutions. Unfortunately, in today's world, we are divided into two. Business community has its own discussions, global companies are having their own discussions, and then UN and global institutions are having their own. And sometimes I feel that there is no real dialogue between these two. At Nokia, we had Stephen Elop as a CEO. I always remember when we met governmental people, and he said, "Esko, they are always having these happy talks," illustrating that he was not happy to listen to those phrases, phraseology they were using, because they were empty words quite often. On the business side, I think this efficiency aspect has been too dominant. Companies have not fully understood that you cannot create good sustainable business if the society around you is not functioning well. That is a fact of life. All right, then I'd like to move to, I have to continue briefly about this India case. Then the next speaker from India, he continued. He said, Mr. Aho has right that mobile phones has solved one problem, but we have another one. Global institutions and governments are spending huge sums of money to save banks. But they don't assist people to get access to banking sector and banking services. There are so many billions of people without access to banking. I immediately checked the figures. Only between 2014 and 2017, the number of unbanked, so-called unbanked people in the world declined from 2.5 billion to 1.7 billion. 800 million people were able to get access to bank account within 3 years. That discussion ended as well. So this is a good example how we have misunderstood what companies can do, but companies have to understand what they cannot do. If you look at mobile business, I can see here at least two colleagues of mine, former colleagues of mine, Timo and Mikko. You remember what kind of role GSM standard played? And it was governmental regulatory effort done together with business, but it was fundamental factor behind the success story of European businesses. But we are not doing the same thing when we are, for example, trying to solve energy problems. Companies are on having their own discussion going on, and governments another one. Now we have special challenges because of behavior of individual countries. And most remarkable case is now with Russia. I know Russia quite well. I visited the Soviet Union for the first time 1975, and since that I've been there maybe 150 times. And first of all, I'd like to say, if somebody is trying to analyze Russia or without visiting the country, better not to listen to him or her, because you cannot understand the country if you have not been there. Secondly, I think we have to put that what has happened in Russia, we have to put that into the context. It's not a question of only about personalities. It's question of rather radical changes in the political system in Russia. In the early 1990s, we had a short period of time when Russia tried to become democracy and market economy. But the fact is that it never reached the level of let's say even let's say no, fundamentally operational democratic and market economy system. And one fundamental reason for that was that Yeltsin failed in two major areas. For the first, he couldn't create critical civil society elements in Russia. The rule of law is fundamental for business. If you want to have good business environment, without rule of law, it's almost impossible to create that. And Russia has never had rule of law. Why Finland, for example, succeeded in its rapid transformation when we became independent in 1917, the main reason was that we inherited the rule of law from Sweden. We had that rule of law principle or principles which were adopted in the newly independent society. Russia never did that. And secondly, the security organizations, security institutions in Russia were not changed, except the top of the organizations. Yeltsin nominated his own men on the top positions, but the structures of the security systems remained there. I was impressed when I heard about this book. This is Egor Gaidar's book about the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's explaining in a very impressive way why the Soviet system collapsed. It was not collapsing because of external forces, but because of the weaknesses of the Soviet system. But in the same time, he wrote about the future of Russia, saying that the biggest risk in Russia is that it is going to suffer from post-imperial nostalgia. And when this book was published originally 2006, no one spoke about Russia's behavior that much yet, 2006, but Gaidar was able to see what is probably going to happen. And he compared Weimar Republic in Germany with Russia, saying that similar fundamental problems existed in Russia in the 1990s and in Germany 1920s. Hyperinflation, weaknesses in democratic institutions, and also rise of nationalism. And he was warning not only Russians but also the outside world that if things are going to go worse, there is a risk that we are going to see fundamental problems with Russia. He said that it is a risk not only for Russia but for the outside world as well, and that risk has now realized. Actually, it's closely linked to a phenomenon which has had impact in every corner of the world. When globalization and its economic consequences started to go in decline, I'd like to say. After financial crisis, the world has not returned back to normal. We have been in abnormal situation since that. And we have been able to survive only by pumping in huge sums of money to support consumption and investments. And the consequence is that we have got inflation. It's not a big surprise. It's a rather logical consequence of this kind of incentives that has been made. But in the same time, we have seen that globalization has divided countries into two: those who are on the winning side and those who are on the losing side, and that has created a rather fruitful environment for nationalistic forces to grow. We have seen that in Russia, but we have seen the same in Turkey, in the UK, in the United States, and China as well. But in the case of Russia, that became extreme phenomenon. Good question is, what had been possible to be done before? Now we have been criticized that we tried to integrate Russia with economic collaboration and technological collaboration. I don't think that it was a wrong decision. It was a failure, but it's another story. We failed, but it was reasonable attempt. I was a member of the ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, for 6 years, and we quite often went back to 1919 when the ICC was founded. They called themselves founders. They called themselves the merchants of peace. They believed that when creating sufficient economic environment for trade to grow, international collaboration, economic collaboration to grow, that is the best guarantee for peace. And that was the experience from the First World War. And we have seen that it has worked. Germany came out of crisis after the Second World War. The European Union is founded on the same principle. We believe that when integration between countries will be increased, economic, technological, social integration will be increased, it means that the risk of conflicts will decrease. And that has worked. We had good reasons to believe that the very same will work with Russia as well. We tried, but we failed. And I think the main reason is that Russia cannot be changed from outside. If Russia is and when it has to be changed, it can be changed only from inside. And the fact is that these security forces, security-oriented forces inside Russia were able to take over the country in a way that it led to fundamental mistakes. I mean fundamental mistakes. They are not only destroying Ukraine and infrastructure in Ukraine, but they are destroying their own country as well, the future of the country. I wrote a book which was published recently, and in the beginning of August I wrote about young generation in Russia. And my conclusion was that if young people in Russia, those, let's say, under 35, under 40 years, if they have nothing to say in the society, they will move out. I said in Finnish, jos eivät ne voi muuttaa maata, ne muuttavat maasta. And that has happened. Hundreds of thousands of people have left the country. Those people who Russia urgently needs to create a future for its society. And now I saw in Berlin figures about the future of Russia's role in the global energy market. It's a disaster. It's going to be a disaster. Russia's capacity to play a role in gas market, but as well in oil market on the longer term, is going to be in decline. And it's a disaster for a country which has 20, 40, 60 rule. 20% of GDP, 40% of governmental expenditure, and 60% of exports comes from energy. If energy production goes down, exports go down, country has no resources to grow or even to keep the existing level of wealth. So we are going to see fundamental crisis in Russia, and I think we have good reasons to expect that this is going to last rather long. We have to be prepared for long-lasting crises. And in the same time, Ukraine has been doing roughly the same what Finland did 1939. I have an Austrian colleague of mine who I met him a few weeks ago in Austria, and I said, read about the Winter War and compare the Winter War and Russia's attack in Ukraine. How many similarities you will find? And he came to meet me a couple of days ago, and he said, I did that, and I have to say I was surprised how similar these two cases are. And I think that we have to start thinking about the future of Ukraine now. We have to be prepared that Ukraine will be reconstructed. It's going to be huge opportunity for Europe. Economic opportunity, industrial opportunity. We are speaking about 750 billion euros investment in the future. War is continuing, but I have to say we have to start preparing for that phase. Then, second issue is China. What is going to happen with China? Because after the last Party Congress, you can see similarities with some similarities with Russia. But I want to say, don't look at China to be next, or China to be like Russia has been. What Russia is today, China is not going to be that tomorrow. Chinese are acting in a different way. Chinese government is acting in a different way. But we have to understand that China's role has changed between 1978, when economic reforms were started, until recent years. Economy was dominant. Politics was secondary. Now it's vice versa. Politics is dominant, economy is secondary. And if you look at the leadership of China, all these 7 top people are coming outside of economic sphere. They don't have experience in economy. Their experience is in the political field. That is going to have an impact in China. And China is going to be more nationalistic in the future. That is rather clear. But that dependency is there. We have been set on the basis of this Russia experience that we have to start cutting dependency on China. Sounds easy. Why not to do that? But let's take an example: rare earths. I just looked at figures. How much dependent we are in the Western world in Chinese rare earths production. It's from 80 to 90, maybe even 99%. It depends on the minerals. And the same people who are saying that we have to cut all ties with China, they want to use electric cars. Electric cars without using rare earths. It's not going to work. And the same people are saying we cannot increase mining in Finland because that is dangerous for our environment. But we want to drive with the electric cars. I think we have to understand that when we are looking at China and dependency on China, we have to be able to reduce dependency on China. It's rational for Europeans. We cannot be as much dependent on Asia and China as we have been. This semiconductor case is a good example what it means. Efficiency is one aspect, but we have to have security as well, and self-sufficiency in certain respect as well. All right, we have to reduce that dependency, but that means that we have to increase our own production. We are doing that with semiconductors, but unfortunately it will take years. If I remember correct, that major investment, it's Intel that is going to make huge investment in tens of billions in Europe, but it's going to be finalized 2027. So it will take time. When looking at other materials, it's the same. And if you compare, for example, this certain metals that are needed for wind energy production, and electric cars, multiplier is not 2 or 3. Between 2015 and 2050, the increase of need of metals will increase 40 to 50 fold. 40 to 50 fold. It's a huge challenge for European countries, and that's why we cannot speak about dependency with political terms. We have to take also these economic and technological terms on the table. How many minutes I do have? Maybe. Yeah, I will conclude because we have time for discussion. I will conclude by trying to answer the question: what companies can do? How can we survive in environment like this? And I have to say that we have developed a rather good method in Finland to survive in radically changing circumstances. And that started at Sitra 2008, when we ended our Russia program. And we decided to create East Office of Finnish Industries. Sitra was first shareholder as well, but then when Mikko came, you decided to sell the share. Did you make any profit with that? No, probably not. But that was the idea, that business is taking the role. And can you imagine? We started with 17 companies, and now East Office has 29 shareholders. And quite often we are criticized what we are doing, but the fact is that today East Office is needed more than ever. I'm advisor for East Office still, and I participated one event recently, and there were more than 100 participants in a meeting. We need information. We have to learn from each other. We can do a lot together. And this is exceptional method. Not a single similar example exists anywhere in the world. Now we have decided to do the same with China. I was asked 4 years ago to make a study if companies are interested to create China office. And companies, we found 10 companies interested, but that was not enough. And Kone and Antti Herlin was one of those who said, we don't need it. In August last year, Antti was calling me, and they had a meeting there, and he said, now we need it. He had to change his mind, and now we have founded China office. It started its operations in the 1st of June, and we have now 22 shareholders, soon at least 25. So it's in the operational mode. We have 3 objectives. We want to collect information, not only from Finland, but globally. We want to collect the best information available about China and to share that with our shareholders. Secondly, we want to assist companies in China to survive in changing circumstances, quite complicated business environment in China. And for the third, we are trying as well to communicate, and that is not going to be easy, to communicate for the Finnish audience and decision makers that yes, we need to reduce our dependency on China, but that has to be made in a way which is not risking our economic future and foundation of our well-being in this country. And we can do that. I'm sure we can do that. But it means that business and government, business and society have to be integrated. We have to understand that governments need business, but business needs good governments as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very rich introduction to the topic, Esko Aho. And audience, please save your questions, and we will have the two presentations, and after that opportunity for you to ask questions. But next I would like to invite Ambassador Olga Dibrova to the stage. And Ambassador Dibrova has a long career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and you've been based in Finland since October 20, I believe so. So the floor is yours, and thank you so much for being with us here today. And you have opened them. Yes.
Good evening, dear friends, dear Finnish friends. It's a big pleasure and honor to speak for you today, especially on such a pressing topic as geopolitics and business. Very much interlinked, I believe, nowadays. Really, I fully agree with Mr. Aho that the world has changed and the trends are changing, and a lot about global future is being decided now in Ukraine. But it is not so easy to speak about future and sustainability when Ukraine is on the verge of blackout because of massive rocket attacks from the Russian side to our energy infrastructure. Just, last Monday, 50 rockets hit energy infrastructure in 10 regions of Ukraine. And it is the 252nd day of our resistance. And when I mean our, I mean all of us, including Ukraine's partners and allies who help us winning this brutal war. And of course, first and foremost, Finnish nation and Finnish people from whom we receive help really every day from every corner of your country. And we are very, very grateful for comprehensive support from the Finnish government and also for enormous hospitality shown for more than 42,000 Ukrainians who had to flee the war. And taking this opportunity, let me make an urgent call for helping more to Ukraine. We badly need generators, transformers and other energy equipment, along with mobile heating solutions to survive this winter, because more than 30% of Ukrainian energy infrastructure has been either destroyed or damaged. But our repair teams are doing really miracles. I have talked to several mayors in our eastern regions recently, and they are all reporting that we have repaired this, and that. We will be having electricity, but of course, still, it's very much under austerity, and redistributions of energy flows are so that households are more using it during the daytime, and then industries are forced to work during night time. But please use available channels to share this request with wider audience because, like I said, it is very crucial for Ukraine to survive the upcoming winter. So I have been asked to cover in my remarks 3 questions, including preparedness of companies to geopolitical risks, the role of international community in Ukraine's recovery, and actions needed to make our societies more resilient and sustainable. And let me start with the last one, since the way of our common development and sustainability depends mainly on how is the end game of this war. And we have no doubt in Ukraine, and I dare say that in Finland also, that we will win this war. Our common future depends on three factors. First, when and how Ukraine wins this cruel war against a terrorist state. Second, when and how we will fully restore respect to international law and build strong and capable international institutions. Third, how quickly we will overcome negative economic outcomes of the war. To reach this first goal, ending the war, all our governments should ensure liberation of all Ukraine's territories as of 1991 in full, including Crimea, Donbass, and all attempted newly occupied territories. And it should happen as soon as possible. And we need to do our best to make sure that Russia would never pose a threat to any country and any nation. At this point, it requires full political and economic isolation of a terrorist state, Russia, to deprive it of resources to continue its horrific conquest against humanity. Believe us, Ukrainians, we tried all possible ways to get Russia at the negotiations table. And President Zelensky was the most patient one, even after the horrific events of 24th of February this year. He continued calling Russian leader to speak and to negotiate. But unfortunately, Ukrainians and our president were not good enough to speak with. But now, as we are winning the war, the resolve of this war will be in a military way and in a full liberation of all Ukrainian territories. I think we are good enough, and we have proved to be good enough to reach this goal with the help of our allies and partners, of course. Ukraine right now urgently needs more sophisticated weapons from Western partners to push invaders outside and also to close our sky, which is, by the way, successfully happening. These 50 rockets that I have mentioned, 44 of them has been shut down by our air defense. And later, we look forward to provision by the West of security guarantees for Ukraine with further accession to NATO membership. Without lasting security, we will not be able to return to stable business environment, not only in and around Ukraine, but on a global level in terms of weaponizing everything from energy to communication system. And really, we have seen already so many things made as a threat by Russian leadership. And now you probably read in the news that more and more spies are being discovered in Norway, in a Nordic country. The question is, what are they doing there? And according to our analysts, they are exploring the energy infrastructure of Norway to cut the gas flowing from Norway to Europe and to make Europe dependent on Russian fossil oils. Fossil resources, gas and oil. And the tactics do not change. This is blackmail and all kinds of dirty tactics that and they would like us to be just the hostages of their imperialistic adventurers or whatever else is in their hands. You have been also following in the news about Russia's behavior regarding the grain agreement, Black Sea grain agreement, that enables to feed millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world. And truly, every 10th loaf of bread is made of grain from Ukraine. And we see that Russia signed a deal, then first didn't want any deal, then it signed a deal, then it withdrew from a deal, then it suspended its participation in a deal, and now it sort of returns to a deal. But their conclusion is one, that essentials for people, food, is being made a weapon and being made a tool to threaten the whole world. And now I'm becoming. I am coming back to the second goal: restoration and of the international law and institutions. And we need to ensure that all responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and war of aggression of Russia in Ukraine are brought to justice. And truly that without respect to international legal mechanisms, to international law, no business is possible, no living in the world is possible. It means that full investigations of all crimes by International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights, should be implemented effectively, and all cases are well documented and responsible persons are being punished. However, we will need to launch also a special international tribunal against the officials and military of Russian Federation for their crimes in Ukraine. Not only at the point when all, including Putin and all members of his government, parliament and military command are punished, the war will be over. However, it will be the end of the war, but not the start of lasting peace. We will need to ensure full demilitarization and denuclearization of Russia. One more critically important point is comprehensive reform of the United Nations and other international institutions. Rules-based international order could be sustainable only if international law is enforced. Our third goal is global recovery. And here I see only one viable scenario, which is a prompt building of fully green, circular, digital societies, choosing innovations and creativity as a priority number one for national economies' growth model. In this sense, the recovery of Ukraine is a true chance for the whole world to test all tools and best practices needed for the recovery of the world. In Ukraine, we can build together the country of 22nd century, country of the new kind, fully digital, fully green, country of opportunities and source of inspiration. And after all that we have been through since last month, really, this is a dream of Ukraine, to build the country that I have just described, with the close participation of our friends and allies who helped us to reach victory. I strongly believe that for international business, Ukraine is a great destination right now to test new military technologies, new energy solutions, new construction solutions, new communication systems and technologies. In this way, I am coming to my response to the question on the role of international community in Ukraine's recovery. And it is easy. Please read Ukraine's National Recovery Plan presented in Lugano in July this year. Choose a project of your interest. It's very explicit, very precise. Come to the government of Ukraine and make an offer. On September 9, the government of Ukraine and the European Commission and the World Bank, in cooperation with partners, released a joint assessment which estimates that the cost of reconstruction and recovery in Ukraine amounts to 349 billion. But these are very modest estimates because, in fact, most probably we will be speaking about the amount close to 600 or 700 billion of euros, since this figure is growing every day. The reconstruction effort will be led by the Ukrainian authorities in close partnership with the European Union and other key partners, such as G7 and G20 partners and other third countries, as well as international financial institutions and international organizations. I would like to stress that partnerships between cities and regions in the European Union and those in Ukraine will enrich and accelerate the reconstruction. And really interregional cooperation, municipality to municipality cooperation is the area which is boosting among Ukraine and Finland. Since 24th of February, we have already signed an agreement between Turku and Kharkiv, and there are many more in the pipelines. The main source of funds for recovery should include confiscated Russian assets and after-war reparations. We also rely on the EU reconstruction platform for Ukraine to coordinate rebuilding process and the active role of the European Investment Bank, along with an active engagement of all other international partners and international financial institutions. And our call to international business is to start investment planning right now. Since we talk of recovery of the future new member of the European Union and investments into the new model of economy of the future. Dear friends, regarding preparedness of companies to geopolitical risks, my advice will be very brief. Invest all your efforts to help governments to secure peace based on rules-based international order. Invest your time and resources into shaping the future. That includes education, R&D, and innovations. We need healthy, strong societies for peaceful future. As to me, education, democracy, freedom of speech, respect for others are key in this regard. Ukraine has survived for all these months, not because of bravery, not only because of bravery of our strong nation. We are winning because of innovation produced by our talented people. Despite the war, Ukrainian military IT experts, together with NATO, are developing unique situational awareness tool Delta. This battlefield solution helps to make data-based decisions and be fully informed about the enemy. Our IT army, see, we are innovative also in calling our other army IT army. So our IT army has effectively stopped 1,300 cyber attacks since February 24. And they are working every day because the cyber attacks are continuing every day in dozens, sometimes in hundreds. Our troops in weeks, not months or years, are learning how to use sophisticated weapon systems. And I think we have surprised all NATO allies that we can learn, that our military can learn so fast. I don't even say that our business is able to ensure its operations in many parts of the country, despite of almost daily rocket attacks, quickly adapting to the new realities which are being unfolded with every moment. Creativity and innovations are our common future. But right now we need to win the war, we need weapons to fight, generators and heating systems to survive, and keep unity, while we could win only when we are united. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Diprova, for a really thought-provoking and inspirational talk. And now we'll go to our last speech of the day before the panel, and it will be given by Professor Maria De Villa. Professor De Villa obtained her PhD in strategy from Cranfield University, the UK. Her research is focused on corporate political strategies, management of high political risk, and the internationalization of emerging market multinationals. So the floor is yours, Maria.
Thank you, Tina. I want to express my gratitude to Aalto University for inviting me as a visiting professor, and in particular for inviting me to this seminar on geopolitics and business, which is a topic that I've been conducting research in for more than a decade now. My presentation is titled Assessing Geopolitical Risk. And I have chosen this topic because I see my role in academia as trying to help companies, practitioners, managers, which are facing the battle line, and it's trying to operate in a very hostile geopolitical context. So how I view my work is trying to design, co-create tools along with managers to help them in their daily tasks. I focus on this topic, my presentation, because the Russia-NATO conflict and US-China strategic competition have highlighted the importance of geopolitics in business. We have all seen how events like this are having impacts on the international relations, the supply chains, the trade in many countries, and this is impacting the operations of companies. And we expect that geopolitical issues are going to rise as the world shifts from a unilateral order to a multipolar system. So according to the US National Intelligence Council, no single state is likely to be positioned to dominate across all regions or domains, and states will compete to advance their ideologies, goals, and interests. So if this is the setting that we will be confronting, for sure, it's going to be very challenging for executives. It's going to be a major concern for managers. It's clear by the presentations we have heard from our other panelists. So the challenge is that although this is clear, many managers often find it challenging to assess geopolitical risk. So what we have done is that with the aim of supporting managers in assessing geopolitical risk, we led co-creation workshops with over 100 managers who are constantly challenged by geopolitical risk and will continue to be challenged. And with them, we were able to identify relevant factors to evaluate at multiple levels of analysis that can be useful for managers to actually determine what is the company's real degree of exposure to geopolitical risk. Because what we see is that many managers state that they can have access to general assessments of geopolitical risks, but that this can be misleading. We really need to look at the impacts company by company. So we came up with a multi-level approach for the assessment of geopolitical risk. And basically, the idea of having a multi-level approach is because it allows us to take into account the unique characteristics of a company's operations. And by doing this, we are able to, at the end of the process, have a more tailored assessment of its real exposure to geopolitical risk. And believe me, this is key. This is key for managers because the same geopolitical issue can generate, for some firms, a high level of risk and be posed as a threat. But for other firms, the same event can make them experience a low level of risk and can even provide opportunities for their business. So we can see this clearly in the case of Huawei. Huawei experienced in 2019 a ban by the US government. And this ban was accusing Huawei of using its products to spy. And this was a big challenge for the national security of the US because the company Huawei was expected to have, and has been proven to have, connections with the Chinese government. So as a result of this ban, Huawei was unable to keep on having Google apps in its smartphones. And by not being able to have Google apps, it lost $30 billion in its smartphone business. In contrast, what happened to Samsung is that it increased by 60% its profit, and Apple became a top seller in China. This company has lost leadership in China for many years, and when this happened, it was able to recover that position. So we can see how the same geopolitical event has different effects on different companies. So with these managers, we came up with the idea of including the supranational, as you mentioned, the international, national, industry, and firm levels of analysis as levels that we suggest should be taken into account when you want to have an holistic assessment of geopolitical risk. So now what I want to do is to take you through the different levels of analysis and show you the different factors that these managers have taken into account. I also want to let you know that tomorrow you'll receive an email in which you will find an attachment to an article describing this framework, but you can take photos anyway. This presentation is for you. But hopefully that article will also complement this session in more detail. So basically, the first factor at the supranational level is the ability of supranational organizations to mediate and resolve political tensions or conflicts between countries. And this was precisely what you were mentioning. Because what we have seen is that the extent to which the supranational institutions can help de-escalate geopolitical risk is very important. But that depends on the willingness that those countries that are facing tensions or a conflict have in considering mediation or complying with terms of settlement and resolutions, for example, from the UN. We have many cases in which this has worked in the past, but we all know that in the case of Russia, in the recent assault on Ukraine, Russia used its veto to defend its assault. And this really weakened the UN's ability to counter Russia's aggression. So this is a big question, a governance question that comes up. So we need to take that into account. If those countries involved in the tensions, if they're willing, perhaps this can be useful. If one of them might not be willing, then the supranational institutions just don't work. Another factor at the international level is political relations between countries. They play a critical role because what we have found is that they can either augment or they can mitigate political tensions between countries. And as well, the effects that those geopolitical tensions can have on companies' operations. So a very easy case to point at is that you were mentioning as well, is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. We all know that the potential threat of China's invasion into Taiwan has made us all over the world consider what would happen if this takes place. And cooperative relations between Taiwan, Japan, and the US have allowed this company to now be building plants in the US and Japan to mitigate this potential geopolitical risk. So political relations do matter. Another aspect at the international level is dependence between countries on natural resources, food supplies, technologies, and others. This also came up very clearly in the prior presentations. A very clear case is the dependence of Germany on Russian gas. And you told us a very interesting story that's evolving on this topic. So a very interesting risk, but a very sad risk that we're facing today. And we have seen how this has challenged the business community operating in Germany because it has made them look at ways to either replace or reduce at least their dependence on gas. So this has been a challenge for the business community. At the national level, we're considering the development by countries of technologies, weapons, or others that can redefine their power and influence. We all know that this is important. We need to be tracking this because for sure when there are changes in the balance of power, this implies risks of all types to multinationals or companies of any size in any industry all around the globe. Another important topic is the political orientation and agendas of governments at the national level, because we know that that orientation for certainly is going to intensify or weaken geopolitical risk. What we have seen clearly in the case of Russia is that its political agenda, led by President Putin, has an expansionist objective, and that has escalated its tensions with Ukraine, and now we are facing the current war. Another aspect at the national level are business-government relations, and business-government relations in the countries that are facing tensions or conflict. For example, in the case of Russia, we saw how, as foreign companies started and are increasingly exiting the market, the Russian government has responded by, let's say, threatening these companies and saying that if more foreign multinationals start considering leaving the country, they will be expropriated. So we need to ask ourselves to what extent any of the governments involved can target our company's operations in any way. Then at the industry level, I think we're studying sustainable supply chains at the moment here at Aalto. Definitely we need to consider the effects throughout our value chain of geopolitical events. And basically we have all seen around the world how the situation in Russia has led to shortages of fertilizers for the food industry. But I also want to show that despite this has been all over the news and a big challenges for multinationals like Nestlé, but also for smaller companies, we see a rising firm in Africa like Dangote Fertilizer, who was starting just out to grow, and this happens, and it's just a huge business opportunity for this company to be able to grow and internationalize really quickly. So we can see here how some things that are really difficult pose opportunities for some companies. At the industry levels, also stakeholders are very important. We're seeing the impact of stakeholders' expectations and interests and how they are shaping companies' decisions. So we urge executives to take that into account, to assess what are the expectations of their stakeholders and how they respond to geopolitical risk. And we have clearly seen this also again in Russia, where many stakeholders of all kinds, investors and consumers, have pressured companies to exit or to stop selling at least some products in Russia. So stakeholders have an increasing voice all over the world, and they have a voice in our responses to geopolitical conflict. At the firm level, the type of operations of companies is also something that we need to consider, because definitely the risk that a production plant is facing is very different than perhaps the risk that a distribution office is facing in a difficult market. We all know that production plants tend to have more assets, so probably if they're facing a potential expropriation, they're in a higher risk or a risk that costs much more for the company. So understanding the type of operation and its exposure is also very necessary. And finally, political capabilities. Firms have been challenged for long by their local political context and also by the international geopolitical context. So many have been able to develop very interesting capabilities to deal with these challenges. And we have seen, for example, how Airbus has managed to use its lobbying capabilities to pursue the European Union to at least temporarily avoid sanctioning Russian titanium, while it looks very actively for alternative suppliers. So looking at your own capabilities politically speaking, to lobby, in, in any other way to find alternatives with the government to deal with these situations might be useful to mitigate somehow your exposure to geopolitical risk. So this is my presentation. This is the article you will be receiving tomorrow, Assessing Geopolitical Risk, a multi-level approach for managers of multinationals, but it does apply to any type of firm regarding size or regarding industry. And I want to say that it does include something interesting, and it's a table with very practical questions that you can use to think about all of the factors at the different levels. And it also includes some sources of information that you could take into account to assess the different factors. I hope this is useful somehow. And I really, really look forward to engaging with anybody in the business community in thinking how we can help you assess your own exposure to geopolitical risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria del Villa, for providing us with a really, really useful framework for analyzing a very complex phenomenon. Now I would like to welcome all the panelists to the floor, and I suggest that we then start immediately with the audience questions, this panel. So please. Yes.
This is working. Now it's working.
Oliko se siellä?
Kumpi pääsee?
Mä katson. Kyllä, joo, nyt pitäisi. And do we have a questions from the audience, please?
If there is no question immediately, I can answer one without a question. Because I think it's amazing story what happened in Finland after the war. And I think Ukrainians, you have good reasons to read what happened during the Winter War and Continuation War, but also what happened after the war. Finland was not allowed to get martial aid. Politically, it was impossible. But we joined the World Bank and the IMF that 1948. Actually, application was sent 47, 3 years before Sweden. We got loans, and those loans played a big role in recovery of Finland. And secondly, can you imagine what the International Olympic Committee did summer 1947 when Zhudanov and the Supervision Council was still in Helsinki? We didn't have a peace agreement. But the International Olympic Committee decided to give Finland opportunity to host the Olympic Games 1952. Germany was blocked from 48 Olympic Games. We were fighting against the Soviets together with Germany. We were allowed to not only to participate in the Olympics, but to host next Olympic Games. I cannot imagine how come it was possible. Amsterdam was another alternative, and then 4 or 5 American cities. So my message is that Ukrainians have to start planning as well what you are going to do in order to get that support in a way which will work in the best possible way. And you have to be prepared for that. It's not only a question of money, it's a question of a legal system, lack of corruption, things like that. So it's very important. And that worked in Finland after the war. We were ready to spend all the money we got in a most efficient way.
Is this working? Yeah. Thank you very much for this advice. I think, in fact, we have already started the process. We have this big plan for 10 years, how to not just rebuild, but how to reform Ukraine, this National Recovery Plan presented in Lugano. And I think another important track is Ukraine's path towards the European Union.
That's right.
And actually, we have already fulfilled roughly 70% of the requirements, but there are recommendations given to Ukraine, and despite all the hardships of war, we are fulfilling these recommendations very quickly, I would say.
But I have to say that when discussing with companies who have been operating in Ukraine, you have to listen to them and their advice, what you should do, because you have a long way to go because of legacies, old legacies.
Yeah, but Ukraine is famous for making long ways short.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And I'm optimistic as well, because I have seen a young generation, a new generation to take positions in Ukraine.
If I may continue from here, like kind of going to kind of really on a kind of an individual level and your position as an ambassador. So may I ask that what kind of leadership has it required from you to act as an ambassador during this wartime?
I think the most challenging thing for myself nowadays is to be at several places at the same time. But it's very good. It's a big honor and pleasure to be ambassador to Finland, because Ukraine gets so much support, and Ukraine is visible. Ukraine is welcome. But I think what is the biggest part of this role of being ambassador to Finland is to be a guardian of trust. Many people told me that the fact that they saw me from the very first hours of this large-scale invasion everywhere, defending my country, struggling, trying to get help for Ukraine, was very important for them, and it sort of inspired them also to help to Ukraine. But speaking generally, this is to lead, a very complex mechanism. This is channeling help to Ukraine, getting all the practical agreements with the leadership of Finland, with the government regarding weapons supply, regarding humanitarian assistance, financial assistance. This is cooperating with many stakeholders, with private business to this end also. This is about, giving some attention to the Ukrainians that are here, and also to give the look into the future. We have started speaking about rebuilding of Ukraine on different venues with different business associations since the end of April. And I think it's also played an important role how people were seeing us being optimistic and looking for opportunities to make our country better and to provide opportunities for the whole world to improve.
Thank you. Esko Aho, I'd like to ask you your kind of expectations of the future, if you think of both the business and political relationship between Finland and Russia. So what kind of a relationship are you expect to see?
In the present situation, all the options are closed. It's very, very clear. The key question is what is going to happen in Russia in the future? And we don't know. I think this war against Ukraine, it's completely irrational. I have said that Putin took 4 simultaneous risks without any reason, any rational reason. Political risk, military risk, economic risk, and technological one. And I think all these risks have now realized. So that it's only question of, I think it's only question of time when there is going to be the end of this rule. The question is what kind of rule is coming instead of that. We don't know. And better not to dream about rapid changes. I think we have to be realistic and to say that Russia is able to be changed only from inside. Outside forces cannot change Russia. But if that will happen, I think we have to look at young generation. There is one difference between early 90s and this situation. Early 90s, all those who tried to create democracy, market economy, human rights principles, and the rule of law in Russia, they were educated in the Soviet system. They were Homo Sovieticus, all of them. But now this new generation, younger generation, it has much broader approach. They have nothing to say in Russia now, but if and when they are going to have, I think we have good reasons not only to listen to them, but also to be ready to work with them. And that's why I think, in spite of the fact that we have to blame Russia and we have to be very critical, we have to cut certain ties, we have to listen, we have to keep our eyes and ears open. Because someday we need to be ready to work with the Russians. And secondly, NATO membership can solve part of our problems, security-related problems, but Russia will stay there, and the border will stay there. Mm. And that is something we have to keep in our mind as well. Mm. May I add one aspect to previous discussions as well, and that is about dependencies. Who made a mistake in Germany? Those who decided to buy gas from Russia, or those who rejected existing options? Germany became dependent on Russian gas because they rejected use of nuclear power and coal. And that's why in Germany use of natural gas increased from 19 to 27% of the total. We in Finland, we constructed pipeline in the 1970s. I remember that. I was in politics active already in that time. And we decided, yes, we will have a pipeline, but the share of the Russian gas has to be limited. And all those companies using Russian gas, they have to have alternatives. It was rational here. We were so close to Russia that we understood that. We had good political relations with Russia, or the Soviet Union, but we understood that dependency has its limits. Mm. Germany made a mistake, and the mistake was not made by constructing that pipeline, but mistake was made already before. And don't do the same mistake with China. We cannot cut ties with China and say that, all right, now the problem has been solved. Mm. It's not like that. We have to understand that we are dependent on China. Certain part of dependency is acceptable, certain level of dependency is acceptable, but in certain areas we are too dependent on China.
Mm. Thank you very much. I hope there is some questions from the audience.
Mikko, at least. Yeah. Question on Presemo, if I may ask. How do you see the effect of Joe Biden's administration in US in Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Who would like
to? You mean this present or the administration after next week's elections in the US? The United States is a wild card. And I think we have to be extremely concerned what's going on in the United States. That America we learned to know in 1970s, 1980s, even 1990s, it doesn't exist anymore. And that is dangerous. It's very dangerous. And I don't know what the consequences are, but we have to be prepared for that as well. Europe has to be prepared that the United States policy can be changed, and not all those changes are very much welcomed here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There was a question.
Yes, Mikko Kosonen. Esko, you have a long history.
Too long.
Long history in business and politics. And how do you see the role of governments in general evolving going forward in business? During the pandemic and wartime, it's natural that the role of government is intensive, so to say. But also the green transition and all these are calling for intensive government business collaboration. How do you see that evolving? Is it going to be a new normal that we see these intertwined in a much more kind of more forceful way than in the previous decades?
First of all, when listening to business leaders and the political leaders, they are both experts. Political leaders are experts in business, and business leaders are specialists in politics. They can advise each other easily. But I think that when looking governments, I think the problem today is that most of politicians don't understand what market economy means. I have to say I didn't understand that well before joining Nokia and understanding how the business works. It's very difficult to read books and to understand how the global business or local business works. And now we have too many of them who don't have any idea what market means. And in the opposite way as well, we have weaknesses on the business side. Earlier, business people were very much involved in political discussion. Today, they are complete outsiders. But finally, because I think politicians want to regulate the past or the present. But if you want to regulate well, you have to regulate the future. And you know both Timo and Mikko, you know very well how this mobile business was regulated. We regulated the future, and that worked. And now I think we need, in the financial sector, we need regulation for the future. In energy sector, we need regulation for the future. I hope that politicians understand that, because that is very powerful. That is the most powerful tool governments do have, but they don't use that. They don't use that power in an efficient way. I hope that this is not going to lead to just the opposite, that governments believe that now, when times are like they are, they can take control of everything. And that is, in my opinion, the biggest risk. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Excellent question and reflections. And yeah, perhaps we take one more. We are a bit short on time. Such a fascinating topic. So.
Yes, Mr. Aho, you were talking about regulating the future. And the ambassador was talking about the beautiful vision of Ukraine in terms of digital and green future. And I was thinking of the mining. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't want mines. I think what isn't in place is the opportunity of making a beautiful future from it. Because in Finland we have indeed the only country who has the battery metals, all of them in Europe, and but we don't charge. We are suggesting to charge 0.6% instead of what they do in Europe, in US, for example, 20%, or like Norway did on their oil, 78% since 1975. And we don't request the best available technology. And we don't use the opportunity to create a beautiful economy out of it in terms of taking care of the waste, which is 75% of the Finnish waste coming from the mines, even the small mines that we have now. So what do you think of this?
You ask me?
Yes, indeed, please.
I think we can improve a lot, for sure. But we are closing eyes that what's going on in Africa. And we are using metals and minerals coming from Africa without saying anything. And it's only question of destroying, let's say, landscape, but it's also a huge problem as far as bioeconomy is concerned. Forests are destroyed in Africa also because of mining. I think what we are doing mining now in a reasonable way, but we can do that even better. I'm sure about that. But we have to make compromises. We cannot get 100% results. Like we have made compromises with roads and railroads. You have to understand that forestry will be limited because of roads and railroads and construction of cities and towns. There are compromises. We have to do those compromises. And then secondly, that is linked to mining as well. I don't like the idea that Europeans who have destroyed their forests are coming to Finland and Sweden and explaining how we have to handle our forests. And at the same time, when 500,000 hectares of forests are burned every year in Europe, they are coming to say that we have to recover our forest here. To be honest, I understand very well that the government of Finland is not very happy about that. Bioeconomy has huge opportunities in Europe, like mining and minerals as well. We have to use them, but we have to use them in a reasonable way. And to be honest, Finland has been, as far as forests are concerned, we are an example for Europe. Europe is not example for us.
Thank you. If I may address one question, a final question, before we have a more can continue the discussion, but to Maria, and go into the context of Latin America, which you know very well. So would you like really briefly describe a little bit of how companies in that particular region have addressed geopolitical risk?
May I add one thing? What do you think about Lula's election? What is the impact?
Okay, so Lula's presidency as well. So these two questions, please.
We had a full class here at Aalto just this week about Latin America in the Latin American context and the political implications on the economy. And yes, I would say that generally speaking, we are seeing the consolidation of left-wing governments in Latin America. But in Latin America, socialism and left-wing governments look very different, like they look in other countries. And this should be worrying to the world, because I know Latin America is a very faraway region, and in many continents, they don't necessarily take into account very much what's happening in Latin America. But as I view it, I think it's bad news in geopolitical terms that throughout the region, we're seeing these governments consolidating after a period in which we had enjoyed having democratic governments that were reinforcing private entrepreneurship, property rights for long. And this is a backlash. In fact, I can speak for Colombia. We recently had an election, and this has had devastating consequences just now, since August, that the president took hold of office. We are in November, and our currency has devaluated at the highest rates in the world. Just because he doesn't believe in mining or in extracting any further fuels, and this is a very important resource for Colombia. And he has many other ideas of expropriating, nationalizing state-owned companies, taking away private entrepreneurship, and many of these ideas, I believe, will only affect the region further, because as Eko was saying, definitely we need companies. Governments cannot do everything by themselves, and we need strong companies. In fact, if you look at the Boston Consulting Group report that they did in 2009 on Latin America, you will see that they found some multinationals that were the most international from the region and the most innovative, and they found out that these companies were the ones driving the development of the region, not the governments. And they have done just a second version of the report in 2018, and they have validated the same findings. Gladly, my country increased the number of very international and innovative multi-Latinas, but they're having a very hard time because the current government is working hard on pulling them apart. And this is very sad. And I truly believe that it's the private sector, strong companies that are international and that are innovative, the ones that can really create development in regions like mine. So that's why I am dedicating my life as an academic to trying to help companies be better in every sense, to make society better, as the logo of Aalto, and that's why I'm so happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to warmly thank you, our excellent guest today, bringing a very different perspective and rich perspective to this really fascinating nexus of business and geopolitics. Thank you so much for the audience for active engagement, and hopefully we can continue the discussion. And now over to Timo.
Yes, thank you on my behalf as well. We got a great catering of practice and science on very topical topic, and that's what this series is all about. Since I have the mic, I want to especially thank the Mrs. Ambassador for being here today. We are amazed by the stamina that your country has shown, and it was very refreshing also to hear your very nice views of the future. So thank you all for being here, and thank you. And please stay for discussions with a glass of wine as usual. Thank you.